beaver!
Well, in order to know that, we must first look at the evolutionary history and what constitutes a beaver. Beavers are keystone species and environmental engineers. Environmental engineers are organisms that significantly alter their ecosystem for the sake of their own survival. Beavers do this by cutting down trees for the sake of dam construction and for the sake of gathering more food. When beavers cut down more trees, they allow a process of regrowth called succession to take place. Succession is when an area in a habitat is destroyed and new organisms rise and take their place. By doing this, the new organisms with new adaptations that benefit their own individual survival add to the environmental resilience of an area. When this happens, natural disasters such as fires, landslides, or extreme rains are less likely to completely wipe out an area, as the organisms in the area have more resilience and adaptations to survive. Now, when beavers create dams, they inadvertently block the water flow in a lake, which creates more stagnant water and causes the water level to rise in a general area. Now, when they do this, beavers create optimal housing for species such as trout, which have a direct proportional relationship to beaver population as they create more hospitable environments for the trout species themselves. Additionally to this, beavers create housing for bug species, which provide diets to species such as minks and muskrats, who feed on these species and live within the beaver dams themselves. Another species, such as the willow flycatcher, is a bird species that uses beaver dams as nesting grounds, as the beaver dams have optimal twigs and nesting materials used for their areas, and they also eat bugs for their diet as well.
So how exactly are we able to analyze the evolutionary history of the beaver? The answer is through biotechnology, specifically in beavers, the mitochondrial DNA and ankle bone density. So the way that scientists measure ankle bone density is that they do a DEXA scan. What this uncovers is the locomotion of the beaver, specifically where they move from time to time, allowing them to uncover what foods they ate and also possible other rodent species that were related to them. Secondly, they use mitochondrial DNA. This is obviously is DNA, so it allows them to analyze the different genotypes and phenotypes of different rodents and other species of beaver. So what this allows them to analyze is the differences between those species of rodents and beavers, and thus how they evolved over time differently. Additionally, scientists use plant fossils, as shown by the graph right here, to see what beavers ate during this time. So what this allows scientists to do is that it allows them to see what beavers ate, the ecosystem and the biodiversity of the specific ecosystem that the beavers lived in at the time, and thus allows them to see possible common ancestors.
Now we're going to talk about the evolutionary history of beavers. The earliest beavers came about 30 million years ago. However, unlike modern beavers, they could not swim. They instead burrowed in the ground, with a technique called devil's corkscrew. This left behind a spiral-like pattern, which is where it gets its name from. The earliest aquatic beavers, or semi-aquatic, come about 7 million years later, or 23 million years ago. Around the same time, beavers also gained the ability to eat wood and chop down trees. This adaptation came from how they have extremely powerful extremely powerful bite force for their size, and that their teeth were able to be filed down due to the way they ate. The ability to eat wood was helpful during the winter, as it allowed them to store the wood during it, so they didn't have to go out and survive on plants that were often in dormancy. The giant beaver, which came about 5 million years later, or 18 million years ago, did not have this adaptation, and that is why it is believed they went extinct. There are currently 2 living species of beavers, the Eurasian beaver and the North American beaver. They evolved separately as a result of allopathic speciation, which means that the different geographies in the area formed similar but still different species. As the Eurasian beaver, because they have less rivers there, they are heavier and tend to have a less oval shaped and a smaller tail, meaning they are not as good as moving through the water. The North American beaver, however, is smaller and has a bigger tail for its body size, meaning it is much better at moving through the water. Because these beavers are considered two separate species, they cannot create fertile offspring, which is the definition of, different species. Thank you.
So why did the giant beaver exactly go extinct? The reason is that they had inferior gene regulation, specifically the ALDH1A1 gene. This gene encodes for the ability for beavers to metabolize and break down bark and other wooden species of plants. So because of this, giant beavers were not able to survive harsh winters, as they were forced to eat plant species that were always dying out during the winter, whereas the North American and Eurasian beaver were able to metabolize and eat wooden bark, and thus they are alive to this day with this same ability. All right. So how exactly is the ALDH1A1 gene produced? The answer is cell communication. Signals encoding the ALDH1A1 gene is sent to different cells through phosphate groups, which then attach to the outer surface of the cell. This causes the start of the signal transduction pathway. Once the signal reaches the nucleus then sends a signal to the promoter region to start the creation of an RNA sequence that encodes for the LPMO enzyme, the enzyme that is responsible for the metabolization of woody foods. Now, once this RNA sequence is created, this enzyme is able to be activated, and thus beavers are able to metabolize woody foods at a fast rate at all times.
Now it's time to analyze the beaver's more recent evolutionary history in order to get a full grasp on where they live and how they've evolved throughout time. During the late 1800s, the beavers were hunted near extinction as a result of an increasing consumer culture and materialistic society in which the colonists came to the New World and favored and loved the beaver pelt as it sold in markets, and colonists could increase their socioeconomic status. As a result, the beavers were hunted near extinction. There's about 1,200 beavers remaining at their low. This caused a lack of biodiversity, not just in the beaver population, but in all the organisms within beavers' ecosystems. Because the beavers are a keystone species, all the trophic cascades occur in which all the organisms in their ecosystems suffer as a direct result, as proportional result of the beaver population decreasing. So as a result, for example, like the trout, their population would decrease because the beavers built dams that block waterways and allowed for the trout to have a very hospitable habitats in which they had high depth in the water so they could live in an optimal habitat. Also, the beavers, they burn out, tear down trees and forests to build their dams. As a result, they open up niches. However, when their population decreases, all the other organisms' niches get changed. And so the organisms have to adapt to natural selection and decrease in population as a result of these changing niches. Today and age, the beavers' populations have steadily increased and they are no longer endangered. However, they're still at risk of decreasing in population because of human-induced consequences, such as the consequences of amplified climate change from factory emissions and such, right? The greenhouse effect, carbon dioxide from factories get stuck in the atmosphere, and as a result, our Earth is warming increasingly. This causes their natural habitats of lakes to dry out, right? As a consequence, the biodiversity of the beavers decreases and they have to adapt. And this is what we think, because their natural habitats are being dried out, we think that the beavers will evolve in the future to become less dependent on their aquatic lifestyle, in contrast to in the past with how beavers evolved to harsh winters to be more dependent on their aquatic lifestyle so they could store food during the harsh winters. Furthermore, during the Ice Age, these beavers and a lot of different organisms were massive organisms, right? However, as the world heats, right, we think that the beavers and other organisms are going to be increasingly become smaller as they have since the Ice Age. Due to the beavers' evolution, living today are the Eurasian beavers as well as the North American beavers. Now that you know the importance of these beavers and their evolutionary history over time and how they're a keystone species, how do you think you guys as humans can help reduce climate change and help save these really important beaver species? Unfortunately, we were not able to find any of the beavers due to us living in Southern California, as depicted in this graph here showcasing where all the beavers live.